Good day, listeners. You've tuned in to More Than a Funeral, Voices of the Red River Valley, powered by Kosovo Funeral and Cremation Service right here in Moorhead, Minnesota. My name is Tom, and I'm going to be your host today. And whether you are listening on your computer, maybe your phone, car, any other kind of device, and possibly even your tractor or combine, we welcome you here to today's episode. We all know there are so many funeral-related podcasts of interest dealing with so many various issues, but our focus is going to be on the personal aspect of relationships and the multitude of interesting people and organizations that like to call the Red River Valley their home. And on occasion, we might push the edge a little bit, discuss some of those controversial issues. We all know what we're talking about. Red Jell-O. Is it appropriate to serve at church potlucks anymore, or is it a taboo subject? And there's so many other things such as hot dish, casserole. What's the difference between the two anyway? So we invite you to sit back for a few minutes, grab yourself a blistering hot cup of Lutheran Church coffee, and enjoy the conversation. We are glad you stopped by to listen. Well, good day, listeners, and you are listening to More Than a Funeral, Voices of the Red River Valley. As always, my name is Tom Pence. I'm your host today, and you're listening to episode number 9. I'm sitting here today with the old cliche with a man that needs no introduction. But since this is just audio and no video, we have to do an introduction. Well, we're recording here in the middle of June. I'm sitting here with Kevin Wallevand. And if you've been around the area for any amount of time, listen to radio, watch TV, you know who Kevin is. But today, as I was talking with Kevin this morning, I really don't want to talk about all of the episodes in detail because those are all archived and you can watch those just about any time. But I just want to talk a little bit about Kevin, the guy, the man, how his background from the big town of Vining, I believe, and how he went to MSUM and into broadcasting, and then talk about a few of the episodes. But I also want to talk a little bit about and have him tell us a little bit about behind the scenes, what goes on with what he does. So thank you, Kevin. Welcome.
Good morning, Tom.
Doing that.
Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. I don't like to do a lot of the talking, but I'll just give a little bit of background. Vining, Minnesota is your hometown, I understand.
Yeah, the big metro. So it's east of Fergus, about 25 minutes. Little town of about 40 to 50 people. And that's where my dad was from. He grew up on a farm nearby. Later became a mechanic. And that's where I was born and raised. And it's just it's a terrific town. And boy, when I think back, lakes all around. So we would, in the summer, hop on our bikes, drive down to the creek, drive down to the lake, fish. We had motorcycles, bikes, you name it. You basically had the summer to yourself. Parents just kind of let you go, and it was just a great place. All my relatives had farms nearby and grandparents nearby, so pretty Norman Rockwell life.
Is Vining also the home of the Watermelon Fest?
It's home of Watermelon Day in August, yeah, and also home to Karen Nyberg, the NASA astronaut, space shuttle.
That's right.
Astronaut. She's the brains of Vining, not me. Right? Trust me on that one.
So you're not the only highlight of
exactly.
Of Vining, Minnesota. Right on. So you've been with WDAY since 1983. I read a story, did a little bit of background, but tell me a little bit about, I'm jumping way ahead of myself, but anything else about Vining, but also moving on to, after high school, moving on to Moorhead State or MSUM now,
right?
Your degree there, and eventually, again, just starting with WDAY, talking about those legends like Dewey and Boyd and Marv.
Yeah, when I graduated from high school, I knew I had to pay my own way. And at the time, MSU seemed appealing. And I got a couple scholarships there, nothing crazy. But so I went there and started in speech communication, which then morphed into broadcast journalism. They overlapped a little bit. But then after that, got really into the program at MSUM. They had a we started a campus news program while I was there, so we were kind of the guinea pigs. But it was the first attempt at getting students to actually have a weekly news program. We had anchors, we had reporters that went out into the field and did stories. And then on Friday, we recorded and it aired on Prairie Public. And it's still going on to this day. In fact, I'm now teaching over there. But so that was kind of getting my feet wet, so to say. And that turned into an internship then. Marv Bossert was teaching at MSU. That kind of helped a little.
Right.
He kind of was able to see, who might be interested so yeah, the summer of '83, started at WDAY, and here we are, summer of 2025, still there. But you're right, to start at WDAY and work with, these giants of local TV at the time. They, you don't really view it like that today. I know young people certainly don't, but the giants then of Marv and Dewey and Boyd Christensen, they were indeed celebrities in town, and they were such legends. They started really, local TV news.
I kind of call them the trailblazers.
Yeah, they really were.
The media.
Yeah, they were lugging film cameras around and processing film, and it was great hearing all their stories. It's kind of funny though. When I grew up in Vining, we had one channel, and it was out of Alexandria, not far down.
Not very public yet.
Right. So I didn't know. I knew these guys once I got to college at WDOY, but I grew up watching Alexandria news TV.
So in your article I read, you were telling me about your passion for not international affairs, but you pretended to be a reporter with a cardboard box.
I loved current events.
Current events, thank you.
Yeah, I really liked it. And part of it is we had in Henry, Minnesota, we had a teacher that taught civics. And every morning on his way to school from Battle Lake, he would record, I assume it was the 7 a.m. national news on radio. He just recorded it on his tape recorder in the car. And then he'd come to class. He'd play it. We'd take notes. Friday, we'd a test. And I loved it. And it was so interesting because think of those times that we were in right then. I recall Vietnam War was still heavy duty. Northern Ireland was still heavy duty.
Right.
Coming out of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and this, that, and the other thing. So really interesting stuff to watch on the news. And my parents, of course, watched the news. And so I watched it. And I started imitating some of the newsmen back then, kind of pretending to be a reporter. I don't know if that had a lot to do with going into it, but certainly the current events did. And that, it's still today. I love it.
As I was reading that, and I mentioned that to my wife this morning, she said, I bet he used his mom's hairbrush as a microphone.
I know I used a cardboard box.
Okay.
I know I set that up as kind of an anchor desk, even though I really didn't want to be an anchor. I don't know why.
See, I thought you maybe cut out a hole and you were back there.
Oh, I should have, yeah. That would have been on the black and white Zenith that we had.
So that was your desk. Okay.
Yeah.
So on to Morehead State.
Yep.
We were talking a little bit about Dewey and Marv and those guys, but like I say, they were the trailblazers that were developing this new form of media, if you want to call it that. And you, I agree with you. The kids these days, to use that cliche,
right?
As long as you have been doing what you've been doing, they look at you differently. But obviously, you have that credibility and stuff like that too. But it's not as if it's a new form of media.
That's so true. And it's funny because of cell phones and what they do.
Oh my.
Kids almost are their own journalists in a way, right? They're videoing everything with their phones and posting it. So they've kind of become their own news source in a way. Whereas back in the day, if a TV crew rolled into town, that was a big deal because everyone watched TV back then. These days, if I walk into a high school, I guarantee you the teachers may know who we are. The kids don't. They're just not watching the news, which is problematic for us. But yeah, it's definitely a change.
They could probably tell you a handful of YouTube influencers, but as far as the journalists, news reporters, anchors on TV, it's like kind of a foreign thing to them.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, it's really something. Even the people who are 25 years old, they're not as tuned into current events as I would like. Even family members, I'm just like, man, didn't you hear about this? No. Did you hear about that? No. If it's on TikTok, they'll hear it.
Yes.
But breaking news, current events, I get it on my phone within seconds, and some people can go a day or two and not have a clue of major events going on.
And I digress here a little bit, but unfortunately, a lot of that breaking news is not accurate. Because
that's 100% true.
Anybody can put anything out there without any accountability.
As we saw over the weekend with the tragedies in Minnesota,
yeah.
There were so many stories out there about not only what happened, but the background of the suspect, etc.
Yeah.
So,
I do remember, you're talking about your Magnavox or your Zenith or something at home.
Yeah,
I do remember. Like you. I was still quite young, but I do remember the Vietnam War broadcast, Walter Cronkite, or Huntley Brinkley report.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I was too young, but I do remember, stuck in my mind, every night I think they would give like the casualty report.
Yeah, they would.
Yeah.
I know CBS and NBC, Huntley and Brinkley did that as well, but Cronkite for sure. And it definitely made an impact on the viewers of America and on the direction of the war.
It had to, yeah. Because right now we would not stand for that. We would not tolerate that. But I kind of get a little off that. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the reasons I really got my attention to sit down with you like this was a story you did about 2 months ago or so about Smith Stimmel, the bodyguard for Abraham Lincoln. And I, like 99% of the people in town, didn't know that this gentleman was buried at Riverside Cemetery in Fargo. And so I did there's not a lot of information about him. You probably covered most of everything, but tell me a little bit about that story. And I'll touch on a couple others that made him, or at least I remember, but
sure.
He apparently had the day off because when Lincoln went to the theater, he didn't like bodyguards.
That's right. About that. And so he was a member of the military. And at the time, the presidents didn't have Secret Service protection like they do today. It was kind of like, well, let's send some soldiers up and take care of the president when he's in parades or going to visit this city or that city. Right. But Lincoln did not want any like extra security at the theater or church.
Okay.
And so these guys that usually protected him, who were soldiers, had the night off until the knock on their door saying, hey, we have a problem. And he buried in Fargo in this just very simple stone. I believe there's also a child there that he and his wife had that's buried there. But I love, we often get tips just from viewers, right? Someone emailed me and just said, hey, I don't know if you know this, but it's the anniversary of the Lincoln assassination, and one of the bodyguards was from Fargo, and you almost like don't believe it.
Right.
But you call up to Riverside Cemetery, and they're like, oh, yeah, that's Stimmel. And so we drove up there, and they walked us over to the grave. And gosh, it'd be great to, see if there's old film. Wouldn't that be great if there was, and there's not, but if someone would have interviewed him back in the day, just how fascinating that would be.
Much like some similarities to, help me out here, the John Kennedy's from the not bodyguard, but Secret Service from North Dakota. What was his name?
Clint Hill.
Thank you, yeah.
Great guy. I've interviewed him, and
I've read his
was
book,
so interesting. That book is really well done.
Yeah.
And recently passed. And I remember after interviewing him thinking, what kind of pain he carried for so many years. And he really did. and he had such trauma from that, and issues with alcohol afterwards, and boy, it really impacted his life. And it was just later in life that he was able to kind of come to terms and talk about it. And he traveled up here, really several times. His connection to Concordia.
Right.
He was, of course, born in North Dakota, but yeah.
When I was thinking of him, he was able to document and
Yes.
write down and journal all of that.
Yeah.
Whereas Smith maybe has nothing that you could find.
Exactly. Yeah. No
The journal.
journaling like others have done. Indeed.
Well, your stories all, for the most part, have a local tie. There's some. We'll talk a little bit about some of your medical trips to Peru, Haiti, things like that. They all have a local tie. I can't envision you doing a story of a In-N-Out burger in Escondido. That was
Exactly.
brought by somebody else. No,
Right.
It's all very, very local.
Mm-hmm.
One of the, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but you definitely earn people's trust as you're talking to them because, as you know, everybody has a story. You just have to prod and dig a little bit, and you have to earn their trust. But I was really, I smiled a lot at your story you did about all those siblings that fished up at Devil's Lake on that old abandoned bridge.
Yeah.
That
was something. It was a message from a viewer.
Yeah.
And generally we don't drop everything and drive up to Church's Ferry. It's a hike.
Yeah.
And but that was so interesting, and for the listeners, the story was about this family, and there was 5 or 6 siblings, and they go fishing nearly weekly near Church's Ferry, and they're all in their 70s and 80s, so they kind of gather on this bridge, an abandoned road, and they fish together. And they grew up with nothing, a really big family, 11 or 12 kids, and their parents just didn't have much, and yet here they are. And that was the point of the story, I think, because as you hear details, that kind of convinces you we need to tell this story, right? And here they are all these years later, still together in some form or fashion, and all went on to have different careers and stuff like that. But the one line that really caught me was the guy said, "This has nothing to do with fishing."
Yep.
And he said, I don't care if I catch a fish. I'm here with family. They're all I have. And I just love hearing conversations like that because they're so organic and so sincere. And of course, that's what you're going to get with families from North Dakota and Minnesota. They're just very real people.
The actual process of fishing was secondary. They were getting together, maintaining that connection of family. It's been said that a good day of fishing can be ruined by the fish because it all depends upon who
You got to clean it.
You catch it, you clean it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your team, if you want to call it that. You probably do some stories solo. But yet I've watched your broadcast. You're standing there with your notepad. I don't think it's a device. I think it's an actual physical notepad.
Yeah.
But you must have some people that go out with you.
Yeah, I'm pretty spoiled because the business today is really, we call them one-man bands or multimedia journalists is the fancy word. But in most markets, especially this size, you are going out by yourself.
Right.
So that's a change, right? So the 80s, 90s at WDAY, we always had crews. 2 people,
Okay.
A camera person and a reporter. And we still have that. Our night side crew is a 2-person crew. And then throughout the day at WDAY, we also have a kind of a floating camera person who gets teamed up. Some may go out alone, but most shops, it's solo. But yeah, I have a photographer who goes out with me. Often, we're utilizing a drone now, GoPro cameras.
Yeah.
We're shooting a lot of our stuff on phones because the high quality phones are insane.
They're high quality.
They're better than our expensive cameras.
Yeah, they are.
And then usually that photographer will edit the piece that
Okay.
I've written.
I feel guilty sometimes taking photographs with my cell phone camera, but they're so good.
Oh gosh, the quality is
my 35 millimeter, even though it's digital, just like it struggles.
a saturation with the phones and the color and the zoom capabilities even.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So the number of broadcasts I see you crank out, to use that term, you have obviously a good team. Somebody else does the editing and things like that. So on a trip up to Church's Ferry, or the other day I think you went down to, I was looking at that old burnt out space that they made a park out of.
Yeah.
So during that travel time, you have to be doing something. Maybe it's just chilling out and not doing anything, but maybe somebody's driving and you're writing.
Yeah, if someone's driving on the way back from the story, I'm writing.
Yeah.
On the way to the story, I'm usually checking emails, setting up stories for another day.
Right.
So I tend to work quite a bit ahead. If there's breaking news, everything changes, right? Your stories get postponed. If I'm needed in a breaking news capacity, that kind of changes what I had scheduled.
Right.
But I'm usually scheduled out 1 or 2 weeks with stories, which means while someone is editing my day story, I'm spending the afternoon confirming, all right, calling someone, are we good for tomorrow at 2:00? That sort of thing. So, a lot of people, a lot of folks maybe don't realize, or you just kind of don't think about it, which I get, but we're turning stories. I have to turn a story every day. You follow me? So it's not like, so the day I went to Oaks, 2-hour drive, that was for 6.
Yeah.
And there's a process. It takes you a while to write it. You have to ingest all your video and ingest your drone video, which takes longer. And then that editing process can go anywhere from 1 hour to 4. Right? The story we did on John Wheeler retiring was about a 6 to 8 hour edit.
Yeah.
Because it was 7.5 minutes long.
Yeah.
I have the luxury of having some of my feature stories, go a little longer. In most markets, 1:30 is all you get. And there's no negotiations, right? 1:30.
Yeah.
And often my feature stories are 2.5, 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And I love that because it gives you a chance to kind of lay it out and let that story, we call it, let that story breathe and let the viewer get to really know the people in your story. So that's not just, I shouldn't say a luxury, that's really a credit to the producers and the newsroom to embrace that.
I want to come back to some of your episodes, a couple of them, but you just bring up a good point which made an impact for me. The longevity of the staff at WDAY is amazing. Knowing that you've been there 40 years, 43 now.
Mm-hmm.
Dana started about that same time too. Kirsten's probably got to have a lot of years. John, did he retire after 40 years?
At 40, yeah.
And I don't want to be too critical, but some other media outlets here in the area, it's just kind of a turnstile of people.
Yeah, and that's we're seeing that nationwide, right? With smaller markets, they are a lot of them have been sold off to big corporations that either own many TV stations, or you get money investment firms buying TV stations, and trust me, they really don't give a rip about news and what have you. And they'll eliminate weather, they'll eliminate sports locally, and then rely on kind of a central place that'll just kind of send you feeds of your weather. Yeah, it's sad. But when you think about it, you mentioned John Wheeler retiring. That's unheard of. That we just saw the retirement of our first meteorologist.
Yeah, that's right.
Because Dewey Berquist was our first weatherman, but he was a celebrity and kind of a showman. He was smart, he was a scientist, and he knew weather, but he was not a meteorologist. So, John was our first meteorologist, and he just retired. Dana's our third newsman. Most cities go through 3 a year.
Right.
And here we have Ken Kennedy, Mark Bossert, and then Dana. I believe Glenn Hansen was in there briefly too. But yeah, and for all these folks to stick around that long, I think is huge credit to the Marcil family because they still own us. They're we're locally owned.
Exactly.
And the forum. So the Marcil family has really been good about when we need stuff and we need it badly, they'll make sure we get it. And the work environment's good and the culture is good. And if I want to go on one of these documentaries, it's not always, oh, sure, you can go, but at least I can get an answer in 5 minutes.
Right.
And
it doesn't have to go up the chain.
No, not through corporate this, that, and the other thing in another city, in another state. You can call up the Marcil family and say, hey, what do you think about this documentary and wherever? And they'll say, let's get back to you. And, yes, they'll give me a yes or no. If it's no, it's probably for a good reason. But, it makes a difference.
As a viewer, you and the others that we've just been talking about, you develop the rapport. You become part, almost like family. I get used to turning on the news, and I know I'm going to see Dana and Kirsten instead of like, who is this guy? Where did he come from? How long is he?
Different day, different week. Yeah,
that's right. And I can sense that, much like Walter Cronkite, we all got used to Uncle Walt, back in the 60s.
It's funny the relationship the viewer has with a news team.
And you can sense that.
Oh, you can. When you're in a grocery store or whatever, and someone comes by and wants to chat, and you may not know them, which is fine. And then suddenly they'll say, oh, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't even," but I just feel like I know you. And I love hearing that. I'm never bothered by viewers who come up and want to chat. That means they're watching, right? And that's our bread and butter. But to have that connection with viewers is just so great. And I'll have people come up, and I maybe did a story when they were a preemie baby, and now they're married with kids. Right. And I love hearing stuff like that.
So when you're sitting in a coffee shop or going through Shields or Hornbachers, when somebody comes up to you, it's not an interruption. Obviously, if you've got your head down, you're working with your notepads, people will probably respect that.
Yeah, it's never a bother.
Yeah. They might have a story.
I always welcome that because you're right. Oftentimes they say, hey, by the way, I heard this is going on in my small town.
Yeah.
I just write it down, and
thank you for telling me.
It's amazing the number of stories you can just get at church or wherever.
I'm a history buff, since I'm becoming part of history now as I get older. But you've made some trips to Vietnam. But the story you did about 2 months ago, roughly, about a gentleman who was honoring his father, who was MIA in Vietnam for many years. And then he had an exhibit, if you want to call it that, at the Fargo Theater, Fargo Air Museum. Mm-hmm. But what really touched me was you somehow came across a photograph of his jets flying in formation, and he saw his dad's call sign or numbers on the side of that plane. He knew that was his dad. So things like that are just powerful to me.
Yeah, that detail. He happened to be watching something on Discovery or the Smithsonian Channel. Mm-hmm. And they were doing a story on jets that were used in the Vietnam War, and sure enough, there was the tail number of his father's plane, and that really struck him, and he kept doing more and more research, and sure enough, that was indeed the one. But yeah, it really meant so much for him to get this display done, right? Mm-hmm. And when I was in Vietnam doing a documentary, I witnessed U.S. Navy personnel still going through hills, right, digging, and they would hire locals to sift through all this stuff. And this was like in 1997 or something that I was there in Vietnam, and they were just full bore going at it, right, and still looking for the remains of Americans who fought there. And I couldn't believe it, that there was this much work going on every day all over Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. So
That's a whole other. Well, let's
Mhm.
talk a little bit about that episode or that series, if you want to
Mhm.
call it that. You commented that that was probably your favorite, to put it that way. The most memorable series that you did was the Vietnam documentary. You accompanied a family,
Mhm.
a wife and some kids up a hill to where their husband and father was killed, and but I'll talk about the process of that in a few minutes. But just touch on a couple things about that whole thing.
Well, I tell you what, I think it's the most memorable because of what didn't happen, right?
Mm.
So anytime we did a documentary overseas or whatever, we had a local reason to go, right? There was a local connection. So in this case, there was a Fargo man who was going to Vietnam because some of his platoon um, uh, colleagues were going, and it was one of the first groups to get into Vietnam after they made the decision to allow this.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to Los Angeles and we get on the plane and we started talking with some of the veterans from other parts of the country, and that's when we realized, oh my gosh, this story is not just a Fargo man going to Vietnam, but it's this wife and her son who are going to see where her husband was killed on this hill. The man who was on that hill who survived, the pilot who dropped all those men in that day in the guilt. Um, so everything kind of changed on the plane on the ride over because we got to know then on this 19-hour flight a little more background. And so, this was before cell phones. We made the decision to kind of change our angle, if you will,
Sure.
to, hey, this is not just a Fargo guy story. This is this incredible story. So the climbing of the hill kind of became our centerpiece.
Okay.
This group climbing and just incredible humidity and heat. And, they're at the time in their 70s.
Wow.
And they got to the top of the hill. The guy who survived told the story. And the son then got to hear about his father, who, by the way, went on to receive the Medal of Honor. He was killed, and he was also a conscientious objector.
Wow. The gentleman that led you up the hill, that was there X amount of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I bet that was the first time he'd been back, I'll bet.
Yeah.
But I bet he could just see it.
Oh,
and
and the
live it.
emotion. I tell you what, the emotion on that hill that day, and still chokes me up because I still talk to the photographer about it. There was an unbelievable feeling up there. He and I, the photographer and I, found ourselves shaking as we were hearing this story. Maybe we're dehydrated or what have you, but hearing this story, and there was people from Vietnam standing off to the side, kind of listening, and then they, prior to the trip, they had made etchings on the wall of those who died in D.C., and they brought those paper sheets and they burned them on the hill. Then
saw that.
And so emotional, and it turned out to be a very healing moment for everyone. And I remember walking down the hill afterwards thinking, we just witnessed just something incredible for these people, just life moments that it certainly changed me. And I still remain friends with all of them all these years later. So obviously it made an impact.
And it also made an impact, as you indicated, on the locals. Because here they now see these people, quote unquote, these people coming back again.
Right.
What's up? A lot of them are probably children of
Exactly.
villagers and things like that. And you talked a little bit about as a youngster watching the news reports. So you knew what you were getting into, kind of.
Yeah.
Whereas a 20-year-old reporter going over there doing that would just be like, oh, nice field, nice trees, tell us a story.
Exactly.
But you knew.
Yeah, and I knew when mothers were coming up to us on the streets of Saigon with their children deformed, and saying, Agent Orange, and saying the U.S. should help us. I knew what they were talking about.
a little bit of the nuts and bolts of these kind of trips. I mean, you've made a trip to Kosovo. Well, the nuts and bolts. When you somehow got this idea to go to Vietnam, how long of a process was that? You had to obviously run it up the flagpole, as they say, and then put all the logistics together. But it's not as if you just jump in the car and drive to Turkey.
No, that one was crazy because, at the time the internet was pretty new and emailing this and that. The biggest thing, however, was you're still dealing with a communist government. So fortunately, my news director was a Vietnam vet, because when we got over to Vietnam, we realized we not only had to pay a communist fixer, but we had to pay for her accommodations. She didn't leave our side for a week.
For a good reason.
Yeah. She was looking at our video that we shot through the lens.
When you say fixer, kind of like a censor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Part of the communist, machinery.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, not only that, but when we got to the airport, after we shot everything on our way back to the U.S., Communist Party then took all of our tapes at the airport. They said to screen them, which I know they didn't, because they didn't have the right. We were shooting on what's called M2. It looks like a mini VHS tape. And I know China didn't have that capability at that time, but when we received them back, they didn't keep them for good. Otherwise, I don't know what I would have done, but they had them all wrapped up and stamped and sealed, so in brown paper. It's bizarre. But yeah, so there was a lot of stuff, we couldn't shoot the military when we were over there. We could shoot flags, but there was many things we couldn't shoot. So yeah, just setting up stuff like that. Kosovo and in Iraq, a little bit different, because if you're embedded, that makes it a little easier.
They tell you where to go and when to go.
Exactly. You usually fly over military and you fly back military. And then once you land at some random airbase, then you fly commercial back. But, those are some tricky moments too. Like when we were embedded with the Guard from North Dakota in Iraq, we spent, a few days with them. And then it was time to get back to do a live shot in Kuwait City, where the satellite was. You were kind of on your own, right? We caught a ride from the desert back to Kuwait City. We had no passports because we were embedded. We didn't need them. But by the same token, if you get caught with no passport in a foreign country, that's not a good situation. So, yeah, it was a little tricky getting back because we didn't have really all the papers we needed.
So these are all episodes that take some time to prepare for. But then you have stories like when you went down to Katrina, Hurricane Katrina. And there again, you've got people, quote unquote, that will get you in. Whereas if I just say, I want to run down to New Orleans and do a little videotaping, they'll stop you. You're not coming in. But you've got the connections. You're able to get in there almost on a moment's notice, within a couple of days, I'd say.
Yeah, that trip to Katrina was so interesting. Part of what we shot down there were college kids from Fargo-Moorhead that were helping clean up. So that kind of helped, get us an in to some of the families that were benefiting from these Fargo-Moorhead kids down there. But I know the space shuttle, we were down there for that when the local astronauts, Karen Nyberg, went into. So there again, a lot of setup, working with NASA, public affairs folks, and then there's always, you arrive there and then there's always a hiccup, right? So you just kind of have to learn to go with the flow.
The trip that you made to, was it a medical team going down to Peru? Was it also a medical team down into Haiti also?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've been to Haiti just over 20 times now.
Seriously?
I've done 2 documentaries. The first year I went, we did a documentary. So I go to Trinity Lutheran, and there were a handful of folks from my church that were nurses who were kind of put together a team.
Okay.
And then it just kind of stayed on from there. And we haven't gone the last 2 years because of the unrest, the gang violence down there.
So you were to some extent embedded also with this medical team.
So interesting. I tell you what, I don't have the brains to be a doctor, but man, I just find that medicine so interesting, especially in third world countries, because you're dealing with such crazy cases, that are not seen or taken care of, late stage this or that. And so often these medical teams are kind of their last resort. And I have found it to be so rewarding.
Rewarding, that's a great word. It also must be incredibly rewarding when families let you into their lives because they trust you. You've done some recent stories about organ donors.
Mm-hmm.
I think I saw one where a gentleman received either the heart or the lungs of somebody.
Yep.
And of course, the donor family had a chance to listen to them. There again, a lot of people at that point of grief, just leave me alone, don't want to talk. But you have a way of breaking down those barriers. Maybe that's not the right word.
Well, I think families, and they vary, but after, especially after like a tragic event, there's kind of like two directions a family will go. They may want to talk to you about their loved one because they think the world of this person, and they want everyone to know about it, and I get it. The others are like, are you kidding? We are in the worst spot of our life, and we're not interested in talking to the media, and I get that as well.
Absolutely.
But I think, the longer you've been around, they're maybe more open to sitting down to speak with you. And I always let them know this is not about like what happened, right? Was it a suicide? Was it this crazy plane crash? Was it this, that, or other? It's not so much that as like, let's talk about, your loved one. Tell me about them. And they're almost always willing to do that, as opposed to knocking on the door with a microphone saying, hey, what do you feel about this? It's just, it's not our jam. So
I had this memory or imagination runs wild. But we've all seen TV shows, movies, where a family's holed up in the house, something's happened, and there's news crews outside, helicopters overhead, don't want to talk to anybody. But I could see somebody calling them and say, hey, Kevin Wallevand wants to talk to you. And they say, let him on in. Everybody else, no, let Kevin in. We'll talk to Kevin.
Well, and you're right about the fact that there are moments where these families are put into a sudden spotlight.
Yeah.
And I've been at these scenes where you're outside a home and it's been some horrible tragedy, and everyone's got their cameras on the house. Yeah. But there are moments, and it's simply because if someone is familiar, or maybe you're from their hometown or your home county, and they know you, and that's happened, where they say, well, we'll just talk to this person.
Yeah. And Dana and Kirsten talked about that in your short video a couple years ago about that. You earned that trust. Some of the more fun ones that I've seen recently was this organ. That, just crazy. And this guy, I'll let you tell it, but this guy taught himself how to play this organ.
Yeah, which is amazing. There was a fellow that heard about an organ that used to be at Weld Hall at MSUM, which is now under remodel. And so they took the organ out, and it sat in a barn over by Holly. And I think it was headed to the landfill. And this kid who does play the organ, he plays at the Fargo Theater and such, but he was self-taught. And so he got this organ for $1. And you think he would like
neighbors really love that.
Right. You think he'd put it up in a church or a theater, but no, he's got it in his living room. And it's funny because we pulled up, we were about 30 yards away from where we parked over by Lindenwood.
Sure.
And we got out of the car and like, holy crap, you can hear the organ.
He was jamming away.
And I asked him, I said, what do your neighbors think? And he says, the only complaint is it's not loud enough.
Wow.
So kind of funny, yeah.
I was at a Red Hawks game on Sunday, and they're implementing a real organ then. I don't think it was that organ,
nope.
But I think he was there.
He was there. I know there's a pretty active theater organ group in town, so good for them.
Alex is a good friend of mine too, and I know
great.
he plays a lot too. Well, we kind of need to kind of bring this in, but do you ever go out on a story and get back and just said, we're not going to do it for no specifics, but
Yeah.
just like it just didn't pan out.
Yeah, once in a great while, very rarely. In fact, I can only think of maybe a couple times where I got back, and I'm not a fan of a story that seems like a commercial.
Right.
We have really strict rules at our station. You just, you know, you don't let business or a commercial type stuff on the air. You know, which good for WDAY. I mean, over the years, I remember some critical stories of businesses in town. Something must have happened, and they were advertisers, but yet no one from management came down and said, "Don't air that," which does not happen everywhere. So good credibility there. Yeah, but yeah, it's pretty rare. You know, I always try to make it work, but sometimes you come back and it's just not there.
Well, knowing your schedule and what you've been telling me about now, you must average about 4 hours of sleep a night.
Well, I try to get in around 7.
Okay.
Everyone else kind of rolls in around 9, but I kind of like to get my feet on the ground and start setting up things, and then usually can get out of there by 6:30.
Okay.
But yeah, your mind is kind of always running, you know, and you never really stop looking for stories. Even, you know, if you're at the lake on the weekends, you might stumble across something like, hey, I'm going to look into this.
Yeah, this old barbecue down here. There's a guy that used to own it. Yes, your profession is, I say it frequently, kind of like mine. What I used to be doing, and it's a phrase I say it. We do the same thing every day, just different.
Right, and you know from what you've done all these years, boy, every funeral's different, right? Yeah. Just like every story's different.
It's a funeral, but it's different.
It is, and the players that you meet a lot of great families, and you meet a lot of interesting people, and you also meet some ones that I don't know, maybe you won't write about in a book.
That's right.
But that's life, right? And I'm all for that, and you know, we live in very challenging times right now, socially, politically, and yeah, it's makes life interesting.
Well, let's just chat a couple minutes here as we wind down. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing now. Obviously, you're continuing on at WDAY. You're teaching at MSUM, but just tell me a little bit about what the next few years look like to you.
Yeah, so I'll be 65 here in a couple of years. So I just had my birthday, 63, and you know, I know I have no reason to like think about or step down or anything like that. I certainly will keep doing this, you know, at least for a couple more years and teach a couple more years, and then and then I'll maybe sit back and kind of reevaluate. But I'm not a calendar counter kind of guy. It's like, oh, I have X number of months left. I don't live that way. But yeah, I'll just keep kind of doing it until I think, that's maybe enough.
Yep. Kind of like John did, you know, when you know, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I can't really see you. I don't. It's difficult for me to imagine just drawing a line in the sand and saying, I'm stopping. I'm just going to go clip coupons. I'm going to go to coffee and go play golf. What you do, you'll continue to do in some capacity.
Yeah, it's because the adrenaline. You know, I can't imagine because. Honestly, every day you're going 90 miles an hour, and then what I like about it is then at 6 o'clock I've packed it away for the day. Yeah. I'm done with it because when I start something, I like to see it through. So going 90 miles an hour and then suddenly retire and be going 20 miles an hour, as you know, that's an adjustment. Yeah.
Right. Well, there was one comment that Dana, or you made actually, and I'm actually going to put a link to that story on WDAY on our podcast. But your final quote was, my work's not done. And I can see that's where you're going.
Yeah, and you're right, whether it's in another capacity, and
teaching,
that's fine. Yeah, but I think if you really like storytelling, and have made a living out of it all these years, I don't think you should just like give it up completely.
Too many people comment on it.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you,
This
Tom.
has been just wonderful. Anything I'm missing or anything you want to just touch on, or are we good to call it a wrap?
No, it was great. It was fun Fun chatting with you.
All right. Well, thank you for enhancing our podcast. And listeners out there, again, thank you for tuning in to More Than a Funeral, Voices of the Red River Valley. You have been listening to More Than a Funeral, Voices of the Red River Valley. And I have been your host, Tom Pence, and I'm one of the funeral directors at Kosovo Funeral and Cremation Service here in Moorhead, Minnesota. The word service has been an intentional part of our name for over 66 years, and we pride ourselves on attention to detail and personal service. Personally, my responsibilities revolve around the advanced planning aspect of our profession, and I enjoy visiting with people as we discuss the many possibilities of a memorable celebration service that will eventually honor a life according to their wishes. And from a practical standpoint, which is getting so very important these days, I help families plan ahead so that the family left behind will not be burdened with a large financial responsibility, therefore allowing them to spend time with their family, remembering their loved one, not having to worry about how to handle the expenses. Asset protection is also a very real issue these days, as many care facilities can cost several $1,000s a month, depending upon the level of care. Kosovo can provide simple and effective ways of protecting those assets, and I welcome the opportunity to visit with you about that. If you enjoyed this podcast and found some value in it, we greatly appreciate your sharing with a friend, and if you have a moment, text somebody right now. Encourage them to give a listen, and perhaps follow the podcast personally. We anticipate publishing a new episode on the first day of each month, so check back for interesting guests and topics. And of course, we also welcome your suggestions for future guests and topics of interest as well. So thank you for listening, and if you want more information and actually want some free estimates or just have questions, contact any of the directors at Kosovo Funeral and Cremation Service. Our phone number is 218-233-1533, and our web address is KosovoFuneralService.com. Thanks again for listening, and from all of us at Kosovo, have a great day.